Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is Methods Conquest. I am hoping CG makes some changes and makes this video irrelevant. Here are the topics we're going to be covering in this video: pre-conquest prep work, the overall strategy that I approach conquest with, feats, how I tackle them, the teams that I'm looking for as we progress through it, and the data discs, how I generally look at it. The data disc is going to be more of a general concept because CG looks to swap those out, so I want this to be a little bit more evergreen. Conquest is another game mode that is going to reward you for having a deep and broad roster, and that is the major philosophy of this channel. There's a lot of incentives now in the game to be building out the rosters the way that I really like to push here. So if you look at Galactic Challenges, Grand Arena, Conquest, these are all game modes that are going to reward you for building out more teams. I push Gear 11 on this channel because of how quickly you can build out other squads by pursuing Gear 11. But there's squads like Troopers, Night Sisters, Grievous, where you can have primarily Gear 11 squads just accented with a couple relics, and you can still perform heavily within Conquest, even through Sector 5, if you target certain teams. And that's where it helps to know your counters. I know some players who deprioritize Grand Arena, they don't know their counters as well. By knowing your counters, you're going to not have to over rely on your good teams, and that is going to help control your stamina expenditure throughout this game mode. One of my more popular methods videos is on my philosophy towards relics, and by understanding which relics are going to have an outsized impact on your roster, you can take weaker squads and have them overperform within this game mode when you combine that with understanding counters. So those are relics like Daka or Jolie, Grievous, B1, where you can surround those relics with Gear 11 characters and be able to climb through some of these harder sectors, and that will save you from having to build these bloated and dominant squads. And the more squads that you have that can do some work within Conquest, you'll be controlling your stamina expenditure. And similarly to the idea behind relics, we're looking for Zetas that can help these teams perform. And some of those work concurrently, like Daka's Serve Again Zeta. There's other Zetas like Django's Unique Zeta, which prevents revives. It's not really needed in other game modes, but it helps out a lot within Conquest. And the final point here is mods. Mods are always important. They always help. And what I do want to highlight is there's been a change to SWGOH.gg where now you used to have to go dig into player data and you could look at mods. They just now have a button now for best mods, which just makes this entire thing a much simpler process where you can now just click on a character, see which mod sets are most popular. So this is how I tackle Conquest. First thing is you need to check all of the feats that are available to you. The feats are going to affect which squads you're going to be using, which data discs you want to be targeting, and which teams you want to be going up against. So with the feats, we are looking at we want to know what kind of squad is being required, which ones require wins, which ones we can fail on purpose, which debuffs or buffs we need to be utilizing. All of this information is going to help us out because what we want to be doing is minimizing the amount of times we need to play this game mode. So we want to double up everywhere where possible. In order to have a complete view of the feats, we're going to want to clear all of the sectors as quickly as possible. So just keep it moving. If you get 1 or 2 stars on a node, don't worry about it. Just keep going. Clear all of the sectors first. You can return to those nodes later on to get 3 stars. It is more important to have a complete perspective on every squad that you're going to need and every feat they're going to need. Because we can't rely that the way CG is approaching Conquest right now is going to remain in the future. Because right now we're getting 3 conquests in a row that require the same feats and squads. I'm not going to be assuming that that is how CG is going to be handling things for the long term. We're going to talk more about feats and data discs in a moment, and we alluded to some of this earlier. But we want to have an optimal approach to how we utilize data discs and how we exploit feats. So with feats, that is just using squads that are going to allow us to accomplish multiple feats per sector. So that's like in this case with sector 3 here with Empire or Stuns or Stealth. There are combinations that we can be using that will allow us to make progress on multiple feats. Now with data discs, what we're trying to do is there are combinations of data discs that are going to make each disc better. So I like to stack like a bunch of offensive discs. There's turn meter discs that you can combine, and we will return to that in a little bit. With refreshes, hopefully this is something that changes in the future with Conquest, but right now you're going to want to do 3 refreshes, 3 energy refreshes right away at the beginning. Maybe hopefully later on by the end of Conquest you can pull back. Unfortunately, that's something that changed before the changes we saw to Conquest. I didn't do any refreshes up until like the last maybe 3 days if I thought I was getting close on certain feats. In this case, you're going to want to front load the refreshes and see if you can pull back near the end if you've been really efficient in how you've approached it. Now, in order to make sure you don't get caught at the end of Conquest, you need to be making daily progress, especially on those feats like squad wins or character kills. Those take some time. They require specific squads. If you have a less broad roster, you're not going to be able to go as deep with them. Some of them are weird teams like the Smuggler one that we had, where most players don't have strong Smuggler teams. You might only be able to beat one node with that particular squad in order to get the feat, and you're not going to be able to swap in like fresh characters, which you can do with other feats like Jedi feats. It's really easy to just swap in different Jedi. Make sure you're keeping your stamina up. Now in terms of stamina, I don't like to fall below 80% because it takes too long for the stamina to build up again if you fall below that. So I like to play a squad maybe 2 times in the morning, 2 times in the evening. During that period, the 80% recovers most of the way to 100%, if not all of the way. You want to avoid over-relying on any single squad, and you can do that by working on multiple feats throughout the process. By opening up those different sectors early, you can be making progress on feats in every sector simultaneously, so you don't have to over-rely on a single squad and fall below that 80%. Because if you fall below that 80%, go into 70 or 60%, then you're in a position where you have to wait for that team to recover, or you're going to have to use those consumables. And so far, I've only had to use consumables once. That was the first time on this new version of Conquest, where I didn't make that daily progress in the way that I should have, and was forced in order to get the red crate to rely on consumables. And that isn't necessary and should be avoided, and with the proper prep work, you can avoid it. These are the squads I am targeting as I go through each sector. With every sector, I want to have as many of these teams as available to me on each node. It's not going to help you to just choose the easiest route. If you choose the easiest route, you might be limiting the types of feats that you accomplish. By giving yourself a diversity of options, you're going to be opening up the possibilities as you return to each sector and go for these different feats. Now, what these teams are giving you are either they're easier teams like Phoenix that you can bring a lot of Gear 11 characters up against and still win. Some of them like Veers, Telzine, Grievous, or Geos, there's revive mechanics that are going to make it easier for you to get certain feats, to minimize the amount of attempts that you're going to have to do. The same thing with Mon Mothma. Gas, it doesn't help with this current set of conquest of feats for these past conquests, but the prior set of conquests during the cap period, I used gas a lot because we had that feat for a number of marks, and gas was great to get through that number of marked feats because you could target one of the other clones without wiping them out and just keep getting marks through each gas. In addition to these squads, look for teams that have poor or broken synergy. In some cases, like Mon Mothma, you'll see just random rebels with her who aren't rebel fighters. That makes the Mon Mothma squads easier. Rex or the 501st, sometimes you're going to see Cody or other clones with Rex that don't work as well. And going after those teams will make getting certain feats easier, especially with those weaker squads. Feats is where we are going to spend the majority of our time in Conquest, and here is how I prioritize them. Number one, it is those faction or character wins. Those are anywhere from 14 to 20 wins per faction or per set of characters. In this current case, we have to get 20 Darth Maul and SWGOH wins. Each sector has usually 14 wins that we need with a particular squad. Some of those are harder than others. What I like to do there is I want to get 1 or 2 wins in the morning, 1 or 2 wins in the evening every single day, so that by the end of the first week I've made the majority of the progress, at least in those early sectors. As we move through the second week of Conquest, we're making progress on those feats on the later sectors. But you need to be making daily progress on those feats, because if you try and do those all at once in the last couple days, you are not going to be able to do it, because you're going to run out of stamina on the squads that you need to be using in order to beat those particular feats. The next priority is the kills with a particular faction. These are a little bit easier because you can fail on purpose, and that is going to allow you to make progress on the feat without bringing down your stamina. But it's usually in 40 to 50 counts, and that is going to take time. And when you're failing a node on purpose in order to make progress with these feats, the amount of time that it takes is a lot more, because you're going to have to be sitting through that clock, which is, typically it's 5 minutes. But if you are using one of the boss nodes, it's going to take 10 minutes. And in a lot of cases, you might want to be using the boss nodes, because those boss nodes have broken synergies, which makes getting those feats a lot easier. So when it comes to like the smuggler example or the Bad Batch example, where you have these lower gear squads, or for me, I even had Geonosians. I have some really weak Geonosians. I was using them on the middle boss in Sector 4 and Sector 5, going after these various feats, and having to sit through that 10-minute clock. If you do that in the last couple days, you're talking about losing hours in order to go after these feats. That's why you want to make this regular progress every week. And that's like 5 to 10 kills a day to make your life a lot easier without those headaches. Next priority is unique buffs. It should also say unique debuffs. These are things like that Frenzy or Marked or Death Mark. These counts are usually a little bit lower. Sometimes they require a win, sometimes they don't. But because there are fewer characters that can accomplish it, that means your stamina can go down faster. So you might need a little bit more time. Fortunately, with the counts lower, you may only need to do it once or twice a day to make the same kind of progress. The last two are a lot easier to accomplish just as you happen to play Conquest in its entirety. So team composition are all those feats that are saying like no attackers, one attacker, or all attackers, no tanks, all healers and supports, no healers and support characters, that kind of idea. It is a lot easier to do that in conjunction with all of the other feats that you're doing. Same thing with buffs and debuffs. There's a lot of buffs and debuffs in the game that are just will happen on their own, like stuns that we saw earlier, crit chance, whatever. A lot of these you just need to be aware that they're there, and you can choose the appropriate character to accomplish those feats. So those ones are feats that I think players over prioritize because they're easy to do, but really they're going to happen on their own. You shouldn't even be worrying about them. Worry about those harder feats first. So these last points we alluded to while we talked about everything else, but to reiterate them, make daily progress on feats every single day, morning and evening if you can. do the hardest ones first, prioritize those because those are the ones that are going to screw you in the end if you don't. There are feats where you can fail on purpose. That is going to make sure you don't eat up your stamina. Exploit that on the feats where you can, and be aware of the boss nodes, especially the middle boss, because those are great nodes in order to go after certain feats, especially some of those faction and character feats that are a little bit harder if you don't have those characters developed out. Final topic is data disks. Again, we're not going to talk too much about specific data disks because those are subject to change. I want this to be more evergreen. But in general, what I'm looking for is turn meter manipulation because it helps in every game mode and there are feats related to it. Offense, I like to get a lot of stacking, synergizing offense. It helps Gear 11 characters punch up a lot. Same thing with protection and survivability. That helps add to a lot of those weaker squads, especially like that entrenched protection data disk that gives you that starting protection up. That helps a ton. Survivability with the assists is another data disk I like. And then buffs and debuffs, especially when they're stacking or different effects occur with them. Those are the data disks that I'm looking for. Now there's something I didn't realize I needed to talk about, but from talking with my brother, I realized it might be a little confusing. So you have purple data disks that are always 4 dot. There's the green data disks, blue data disks, and gray data disks. You can't compare those to different data disks. Those are all relative. So you have turn meter data disks that are all, for the most part, 1 dot. You have blue ones, green ones, and gray ones. They all have different different stats. So you're just getting like more turn meter with a blue one than a green one than a gray one. It doesn't mean that all the blue data disks are better than the green ones, or all the green ones are better than the gray ones. It doesn't work that way. So my brother was just going after the blue data disks, thinking that they're just across the board better. But there's plenty of times where you might want a gray data disk in your set. Like there's the blindside data disk that is a single dot that is great. I would be slotting that in where I can. Other point I want to be making here is just because you can get these purple ones that sound like they're super powerful, sometimes that's not as good as just a bunch of these 2 dot data disks that can have stacking offense combined with starting offense combined with buff enhanced offense. Like having a bunch of them is very good. It's also a lot of benefit to have redundant data disks, like having multiple stacking offense. So the general points I want to be making is I like to get as many data disks and a variety of them in a set. I don't change them. I don't swap them out unless I'm struggling on a boss node. I don't think it's worth the energy cost. I don't really care about them. Basically, until I don't feel like I'm performing or I'm struggling with a feat is when I will change them or swap them out. Kind of what I grab is what I use. I look to stack them. I like assists. I like those unique ones like blindside and some of those other weird ones. And then I want a diversity set. I would like to have like 2 sets, like either a protection and healing set and an offensive set. The other thing that I do is when I'm given an option between data disks or a Jawa scavenger node, I always go for the data disks. The scavenger nodes, unless I'm getting shards, they are not worth it to me. The couple Jawas you incidentally hit is good enough. I try to avoid being in a situation where I need to use them at all. I hope CG has been hearing a lot of the frustration players have been having with Conquest, and I'm hoping that this video becomes obsolete from them making changes from what people have been saying. I had to play the last Conquest while I was traveling, and it was a miserable experience because I did not have the time for it, but I want Maul early, partly because I have a channel that I'm trying to build, and Maul is the character that I have wanted more than any other character in the game. But Thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone. And as always, be excellent to each other.